First episode.
Oh,
so
okay.
Just jump right in.
Jump right in
with Dan and
yeah,
have him introduce himself.
Yeah. So we'll start with that. So tell us about yourself. Name. What do you do? What are you doing now?
Okay. My name is Dan Joyce. I am a retired director of the Kenosha Public Museums, and I'm an archaeologist.
How long have you been doing that?
My first archaeological dig was in 1980.
Really?
Yeah, a really long time ago.
What was it of?
I went to New Mexico to do a field school, and it was of a great kiva in the Gallup, New Mexico area. And, kiva is kind of an underground ceremonial structure. Usually they're maybe 15 feet across. A great kiva is like 50 feet across. And they do ceremonies down there. It's actually underground originally.
So when I first met you, I met Dan Joyce when I was in college. I think it was the first work study program when you guys opened it up.
Oh, okay.
I was the first one. And I met with you, and you said I would be good there. And we did collections for you. And what was it about mammoths?
It was 1992, 93 that we dug the mammoth. And
the one that's at the museum?
The one that's at the museum, yeah. Okay. And that's in actually kind of northwestern Kenosha County, not quite, central north, something like that.
That's where it was discovered?
Off of Highway E, yeah. Oh. And it was pretty cool. We, in 1964, they were putting a drain tile through this marshy area in order to farm it more easily because they kept getting their tractors stuck. And really rich organic soil because it used to be a cattail marsh. And before that, it used to be a glacial lake. So, 10,000 years ago, it was this nice little lake, and then it slowly infills with vegetation over time and becomes a marsh. And when it was first surveyed in 1835, when they came through here and did the plats and surveys and all that, they actually called it the Little Horicon Marsh, like we have Horicon Marsh kind of in central Wisconsin, because there were so many ducks and geese and other things there.
Yeah.
But anyways, in 1964, they're putting a drain tile through, and they hit a bone, and they didn't quite know what it was at first. The farmer didn't, Mr. Schaefer, and that ended up in the museum, basically. A man named Phil Sander, who was kind of an amateur archaeologist, he came out and at that time in 1964 and made a map, and he knew it was either a mammoth or a mastodon bone. Actually, it was the lower end of the rear leg. So it was like that big ball joint. And, ours is pretty small, maybe an inch and a half wide. Yeah, this is like 10 inches, 12 inches wide. So they knew it was huge, and they knew it was a mammoth or a mastodon. And that ended up in the museum.
And it was a mammoth, not a mastodon.
It was a mammoth, yeah. Eventually but we didn't find that out until we went back 28 years later.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, and, Phil Sander tried to get people interested in the 60s when it was first found, and he just couldn't get anybody out there to dig. He talked to people in Madison and such, which is good because it left it there for us. We found our first bone in 3 days of digging, it's pretty phenomenal. We were very lucky because, even though it's an elephant, basically, you put it in the middle of a 300-acre field, and it's a pretty small thing to find.
Right.
Yeah, so we were pretty lucky. And
What
he
did
made
you
a great
find?
map. The first thing we found was a rear foot, or ankle, I should say, part of the animal called a navicular. And it's about 6 inches long, and it's kind of oval-shaped and kind of maybe an inch thick. In us, on our ankle, it's maybe 3/4 of an inch. So it's really
It was a big bone.
yeah. Again, you got a huge bone. It's an elephant of some sort.
Was the whole skeleton found eventually, or just parts of it?
Yeah. What we did is we excavated. We started August 1st, and we ended up stopping. Let's see, about November 1st, somewhere in there, maybe a little later even. It was a
cold.
long process, and we had to dig with. Usually, archaeologists dig with trowels,
Mhm.
but we couldn't do that because it was all encased in clay. So the clay just sticks to the metal, so you're constantly cleaning the trowels. So we actually use wooden tools to kind
Oh.
of scrape it away.
Yeah.
We were kind of wrapping it up around Halloween, and plastering bones and bringing them back to the lab and stuff. But that was only the first season. This bone pile was just a mass of bones. I mean, they'd stripped the meat off and they kind of threw the bones into a pile. And,
So it was a mammoth that was hunted.
yeah, it was hunted, exactly.
Okay.
And it was the first mammoth that was discovered east of the Mississippi River that was hunted, which
I
is
didn't know
pretty
that.
cool.
Yeah.
And it was just this big disarticulated pile. So everything was torn apart, except for two vertebrae, from the spine that were still stuck together. Otherwise, all the other bones were just torn apart, and some had cut marks on them. And we actually eventually found a couple of stone tools underneath the pelvis, which was kind of like the smoking gun. It's like, yeah, it was killed by people, definitely.
So that part in the museum, that little scene that is set up
Yeah.
at the Kenosha Public Museum, was that to like depict what you think happened?
Yeah, exactly. We've got the murals, and then we've got the butchering scene, and that part is based on all the analysis we did. For instance, if you go there, you'll see there's a young woman kind of inside of the carcass. We know that somebody was inside of the carcass at one point because there's cut marks on the inside of the carcass where the ribs go into the vertebrae. So we know somebody was in there cutting the ribs away from the vertebrae,
Yeah.
but they were doing it from the inside.
So for people that aren't familiar with the museum, it might be good to go kind of give a little bit of rundown of the
Yeah.
museum and where it is and what's featured there or that kind of thing. Do you
Yeah,
wanna-
so Kenosha Public Museum is in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And then, Dan, you had a big influence on the design of the building, right?
Yeah, I was there when we built the building and work with the architects and such. It's kind of an interesting wedge shape that goes through the middle of the building.
With
And
the stones on it?
Yeah, with the stones and the stone wall. And that's actually supposed to be a metaphor for the glaciers going through Wisconsin and going through previous moraines. Moraines are just like gravel dumps.
The glacial till.
Yeah, exactly.
when was the
glacier
museum first opened?
till. 2001 was the
Okay.
public museum. Yeah, and actually the now we are the Kenosha Museum campus because we have three museums. We have the Dinosaur Museum, which is our old building from the 1930s, which was an old post office from about 1908. Kind of a long history of that building. And then we built the Civil War Museum, which concentrates on the upper Midwest.
Have you taught archaeology or history? What do you teach?
Yeah, I've taught a little bit of archaeology over the years. Like I said, I've been at it for a long time. But I've taught museum classes. I teach at University of Wisconsin Parkside.
You still do?
Yeah, do their museum classes.
Oh, cool.
And I'm a research archaeologist there as well, which is kind of an honorary position.
Yeah.
I get to use their resources to do my research, which is fun.
Yeah.
And then they get to say that I work for them and I have all these expertises.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And the instructing side of it, the teaching side of it came later on. You originally started off just working in archaeology, and then it's gradually transitioned into the instructing side of it.
Yeah, actually, I started in the early '80s teaching museum classes.
Okay.
As a graduate student.
Oh, okay, so that's
because I had previous museum experience before I ever went to graduate school. I worked at the Field Museum for quite a while in Chicago.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't gone over it yet, but what led you into the field? Or was there some?
Boy, that's a long, weird story, and I don't even.
I
know.
mean,
some days I go, is it real, or do I remember? Am I remembering that right?
Well, now we got to know.
I guess like anything that you fall into, it's just like, yeah, if you would have asked 10-year-old me, I would have never thought this is what I'd be doing. But maybe there's a way to summarize or.
I always wanted to work in museums, actually. My mom is German, and I was actually born in Germany. My dad was in the Air Force, and I came here when I was like 6 months old. So, but when I went to Germany when I was 7 to visit all my relatives, we went to all castles and museums and things, and I thought history was pretty cool, and working in a museum would be pretty cool. So that ended up me going to Southern Illinois University and getting a degree in history and museums. So that was in the late 70s. God, I'm old. And
Yeah, we won't purposely do the math there. But.
no, don't do the math. The museum I was working at on campus was, it was history, it was anthropology, it was art. And I was the only person in the history department working there. Everybody else was an artist or an anthropologist. So I thought when there's 3 types of degrees you can get to really get into museums, it'd be history, anthropology, or art. And I thought if I go to graduate school, I would go for anthropology, which is what I did. And I went to graduate school in New Mexico. And I worked at the museum there that was the first mammoth kill site ever found in the 1930s. So long history of mammoths. I've been interested in mammoths all my life. I just think they're cool. And to be able to, work with mammoths at Eastern New Mexico University at Blackwater Draw Museum was, kind of like a little dream come true because I was doing archaeology. I actually got to dig on that site in the 1980s. Didn't find it. We were looking for a different type of site. We were looking for a habitation site, not a kill site. So I didn't have any mammoth bones that I dug there. But I worked with a lot of them, like you worked at the Public Museum with bones and things. Yeah. So I did that there. So
You're in the collection.
Saw a lot of bones, and I saw a lot of cut marks. So I knew what a cut mark on a bone looked like, one made by a stone tool, as opposed to like a shovel mark or something.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious what is the most interesting or exciting part of your line of work to you? Is it the physical, like when you're actually there on site, actually hands in the ground digging, or is it more of the instructive side of it, or what is it that I guess it's a simple question of what's your favorite part of it, but obviously
I like field work. I really enjoy field work a lot.
Or is there that feeling when it's like there's just a unique feeling when you're actually finally there digging something for the first time, you don't know what you're gonna uncover?
I mean, when we were digging up the mammoth, we were looking at something that died 14,000 years ago, and no one's seen it since.
I mean, it's got to kind of conjure up, like almost being a kid in the sandbox or something, and
absolutely.
I mean, there's got to be a certain rush there. Like I know I would be excited, like even just metal detecting in a yard or something, just trying to find something old and realizing that this has been here for so long and.
You're the first one to see it in a long time.
Yeah, this last summer, I was working at Indian Agency House in Portage, Wisconsin, and we were looking for the blacksmith shop and the blacksmith's house. And I had decided to dig in a certain area based on what we found the previous couple of years in order to narrow down our target and try to actually hit this thing. And I was more excited by what we call a feature than I was the artifacts I was digging, because I found a feature that showed us that basically the feature is a cellar. And inside the cellar, I was getting log cabin chinking. So kind of a triangular cross section, one smooth side that you could see, and then the 2 sides against the logs. So I thought, okay, I've got a cellar, I've got log cabin chinking, and once you go back to the historic records, the blacksmith's house was a frame structure, but the kitchen on the back, and kitchens usually have a cellar, was a log cabin. So I think we found the house, which that was more exciting to me than the stuff I was digging up, actually. And it's the context of what you find is interesting always. In the bottom of a cellar, we found a gun flint from an old flintlock gun. This is 1830s period, so that's when they would be using that kind of thing. But looking at it, it wasn't used in a gun. They were starting fires with it. You can take a piece of flint and a steel and make sparks. So they were using it to start fires instead of using it in a gun, which is kind of cool. It's just,
Something
Yeah.
so little, but you
Yeah,
can tell you're
exactly.
super excited and happy when you talk about this.
Yeah, it was interesting, and it was fun after 2 full seasons, and this was our third, to actually find a part of the house. Now this next year, or this year, this summer, we'll have to figure out where the house goes, which direction it goes in and such.
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things. Well, we were just talking about our mutual knowledge of the Oak Island mystery, but
Yeah.
and just from me being in, I'm not a professional in this field by any means. I just have just my layman's knowledge of it. But like if something is hand wrought or not, like how things can be dated to very distinct periods of time based on, like you said, like the chinking on the
Yep.
on the log cabin structure and everything. And I've just found that to be fascinating, that certain how things were made or manufactured can just narrow down such a specific time frame, or like pre this year or pre that year.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of have to think about it as kind of like fashion. If I look at a photograph from the 1960s, I can look at the way people are dressed and kind of know it's from the 1960s without even having that date said to me. And that's what archaeologists do. They look at different styles of things. Like the Indian Agency House was the Indian Agency House for a little while, and it was a trading post for a little while. Then it became a farm for like 70 years. So we have all kinds of different dates of artifacts that we dig up. And just looking at like nails, I mean, I can date nails based on a couple of books that I have within 20 years, just on a different nail styles.
Yeah, whether there's a square shank, or if it's a rose head, or if it's a square head, or it's I've always just stuff is fascinating. I think that's a huge wealth of knowledge that is going to be important infinitely into the future, because things are only going to get older, and people are there's always going to be that gap between current knowledge and, I guess, past knowledge. And I don't know, sometimes I don't know, I'm always kind of thinking like, how much are we going to
remember?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like, I think about the generational thing too. Like what, how is it going to be different going forward? Obviously there's so many new technologies today that there weren't 80 years ago, and ways to identify stuff, and then getting into the scientific, putting things through,
XRF.
Yeah, XRF and all sorts of different scanning, and the dendro. I'm fascinated by dendrochronology too.
I did that one summer in Alaska. We took samples from live trees, and we took samples from caribou fences that were caribou entrapment fences that were built, hundreds of years. A lot of people don't realize that Wisconsin has like a 200 years fur trade history before they ever become a state. We're French, we're British, and the whole time is fur trade.
Yeah, prior to there being any statehood here,
Exactly.
there's still people out here well before any of those times. So when it was, it would be the wild Midwest, but before.
Well, I actually used to call it the Wild West.
Yeah, it was part of. It was west of what everybody knew, which was the eastern colonies. But
exactly.
So, is there any point when you said you like mammoths?
Yes.
What about them?
What about them?
Yeah.
I've always liked elephants in general.
Yeah.
Just as a kid, you go to the zoo and it's like there's this huge thing kind of, bumbling along, so to speak.
They are just really cool.
Yeah, they are cool. And
they're infinite. They just they're
yeah,
and the level of intelligence that they have is
it's amazing.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And then the dynamics of them, how they live. You've got bachelor males that are kind of young males that are kind of kicked out of the herd when they hit a certain age and roaming around. And that's actually what we see in the Schaefer site is a young male.
Oh, it's a male.
Yeah, I mean he's 30 years old, but he's still not mature.
Wow, you could tell that.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. Because your long bones, like your thigh, it's actually when you're young, it's actually 3 bones. It's you got the 2 end caps. And you can tell by when they fuse and it all becomes one bone, you can actually date them or age them that way.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, we know he's partially fused. Some bones, some ends are, and some are not. So he's about 30, 32 years old, and he's not fully mature. Now, there was a second mammoth that was excavated the following year, the Heber Mammoth, which was like a half mile away from Schaefer. It was also killed by what we call Paleo Indians, about the same date, and it is actually 40 years old, and he's fully mature. Everything's fused. Yeah, so the Schaefer Mammoth, we got about 80% of the animal. Then the way this animal was deposited, it was killed in shallow water. We've got 2 to 3 feet of water that it was killed in. And the reason we know that is because we've looked at the types of snails that were recovered with the bones. And there's like 10 different species, and they all live within 2 to 3 feet of water. And it's a calm water with like no current. So that's how we know that it was deposited in a shallow lake shore, I should say.
Yeah.
And that's what really preserved it. The bones are preserved by the water. And then eventually, there's sediment that comes in and covers the bones. And within 750 years, based on our radiocarbon dating, the bones were fully covered with soil. So they were sealed at that point. But yeah, the bones are in amazing condition, way better than what you see out west. This area really preserves bone really, really well. It's not a real acidic soil. So it really, it's just amazing. We dated the collagen. You've got collagen in your bones. I should say we. We.
I was
I did it myself.
I was about to ask what. How many other different types of fields? I mean, you must work with geologists at some point, and
we work with everybody.
I was gonna say it's not just one single archaeologist figuring out all this data and making sense of it.
No, nothing.
So I was kind of curious at what sort of collaborative there is between you and other.
Huge. It's multidisciplinary. We've got all kinds of people. We have people who do snails.
Yeah.
We have people who do specialized accelerator radiocarbon dating. And actually, they pulled the collagen out of the bone because it's still there after 14,000 years. And they purified that and dated the collagen, which is a much more accurate way of doing it. So we have really exacting dates of like 14,300 years, plus or minus 50, which is a tiny plus or minus.
Well, and then as soon as you find a stone tool,
we have people who are specialists in that.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes on and on. We did pollen cores, pollen samples from the entire strata. So from the top all the way to the bottom, we have the vegetative history for 14,000 years from this site. We've recovered some pine cones that were actually preserved. So we had a specialist to look at those. There were black spruce pine cones, which of course you don't see black spruce around here anymore, not naturally. And it's a wet environment tree as opposed to the white spruce, which is more of a dry environment tree. So being a lakeshore, it's wet, it's boggy, we've got it.
You said how well things get preserved around here. I mean, I guess it's safe to assume that there's probably you're on like a hotbed. Who knows what is still unfound out there? It's got to be
absolutely
really intriguing to just wonder of like we found this here and now, but
Kenosha County, when it was first settled, was about 1/3 water of some sort, whether it's a wet prairie or a marsh or a slough or a lake. So it's an ideal environment. If you go back in time, it's even wetter, and it's perfect for elephants. Elephants drink a lot of water every day. So, you need that kind of resource.
And this used to be the Des Plaines River, right?
Yeah, actually the Des Plaines River, which you can still see today.
Yeah.
It's a pretty tiny little river in Kenosha County. I mean, it's probably 30 feet wide. At the end of the Ice Age, there are parts of the Des Plaines River where you can see the edge of the floodplain, if you look at it at the maps, and it's up to a mile wide at that point. Now, it's probably like Alaskan rivers because you got permafrost, so it's only, a foot deep, but it's a mile wide. So that's a significant body of water.
Yeah.
If they've got canoes, which we're pretty certain they do, we don't have actual evidence of that at that point. But they can move around quite quickly.
I was going to say, I read something interesting that when they first discovered mammoth bones, they actually thought they were human bones.
Yes, yes. Actually, if you look at the skull of a mammoth, you look at it kind of from above, so to speak, and you've got the two tusk sockets, right? So you got these big round sockets because the tusks usually aren't there; they're usually separated at some point. And then right in the middle of the skull, you've got a big depression, and that's where a lot of muscles attached to the trunk, and that's where they got the cyclops.
Yeah, the
idea.
cyclops skull.
Yeah.
So they thought this was like a giant human
Exactly.
with one eye.
Yep. That's where the cyclops.
I think
comes
that's
from.
so interesting.
Yeah.
And our relationship to mammoths and stuff is that we didn't assume that this was an animal, thought
Right.
it was one of us.
It's a giant one-eyed dude.
Yeah, it's a human.
Yeah, it's fun, doing this. What people don't realize, of course, is that once you do the field work, then you got to do all the lab work, and the lab work and the analysis sometimes it takes years. And for the mammoths, I mean, we did 20 straight years of research. We weren't working 8 hours a day at it, but it took 20 years to get all the resources together and get all these scientists looking at different things and writing up reports and such. So, yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah, one of my curiosities is what you see is what the real work is versus what maybe public perception is. Obviously, somebody says archaeologist, they'll think, oh, Indiana Jones, yeah, it's an adventure.
Tomb Raider.
But I think from my perspective, it seems to be there's a lot of tedium to it, and it's very calculated and meticulous, and
it's very.
So yeah, I'd be
it
curious.
Can be very tedious. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I'm curious to hear, how you just mentioned that, or what disparities there are between what people think archaeology is and what it actually is when you're really doing it. And you already alluded to that, but I'm curious if there's any other points there.
I think what people see on TV is the best parts of archaeology. They're always
The
there for the
exciting
discoveries, and there's a lot of tedium in between the best parts. It's very exacting work. If you know, if you're a good archaeologist, you know about soils and how things are deposited and formed. While you're digging, it may be tedious, but you're always looking at the way things are laid out, the way the artifacts are laid out. If you're looking at concentrations, how that concentration got there, or if you're looking at a rodent hole, that went through the site and it's disturbed some things. All of that is stuff you observe during the tedium. So it's a little better than tedium, but not a lot. And then when you get to the analysis, there's always a lot of initial tedium because there's a lot of cleaning of artifacts and cataloging of artifacts and things like that. But then once you start to work with them and analyzing them, that's a lot more fun.
Speaking philosophically,
Yes.
why do you think we just love to dig?
I think there's just an innate curiosity in people, and that's what it is. It could be applied in so many different ways. I think initially that we lived in a lot of caves, obviously.
Yeah.
But
The
we
mystery
also,
of it all and digging deep into
we're
the earth.
underground, and then we lived in a lot of dirt houses.
Yeah.
Whether it's adobe brick or whatever. So I think there's a connection to the dirt or to the earth, obviously. But I also think it's curiosity.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, just human curiosity.
It's such a mystery.
Yeah,
And
I
just
mean
connecting to
that's
it.
how the Native Americans got here was curiosity. They came through the Bering Strait, or they came in canoes down the west coast. Basically hopping from little spots of land that weren't glaciated to another one, and it's curiosity.
Right. And what's also interesting too, and since we're talking about mammoths, is that unlike dinosaurs, which that's a total mystery, and people are fascinated about digging for those.
Yeah.
Mammoths, like we existed with mammoths.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's important to us. And I think that connection of where we thought, they were human bones, I think that's kind of symbolic. Our relationship with mammoths, and still with elephants today.
Our relationship with mammoths is pretty long. I mean, if you go into Europe, you're talking 50,000 years. The modern species has been around, and they were there with mammoths. And then if you go into Neanderthals and things like that, they were there even longer,
Yeah.
a couple 100,000 years living with mammoths.
like in Siberia and everything.
Yeah.
Those mammoths.
Yep.
I read that.
The Siberian ones are interesting because
Yeah.
there's so many that are preserved.
Yeah, I read that like the shamans use them as like their totem spirit animal to help guide them through.
Oh yeah.
Their whatever they went through. I don't know.
Yeah, when I was working in Alaska, I was working in the southwestern part of Alaska on the Bering Sea, and there's a group of folks called Yupik Eskimos. They're separate from Inuits. They're kind of the same lifestyle, different language actually. And one of their myths about finding mammoth bones, because they find mammoth bones up there all the time. They're very well preserved. They're always eroding out.
Yeah.
You know, at one point I was doing field work and I found 2 9-foot-long tusks just eroding out of the mud flat. And you know, this stuff's everywhere. But anyways, one of the myths that they have is that this is an underground burrowing animal that once they hit the sunlight, they disintegrate, and they're all that's left is their bones.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah, so it kind of makes sense, you know, to them.
And then there was one myth about like mammoths are so huge that they need to eat a lot, and that they ate everything, and that's how we got the tundra.
Yes.
One of those stories.
Yeah, but mammoths are fun. I mean, like I said, I've been fascinated ever since I was a kid. What's really weird is this is almost like, you know, outer limits type stuff. I did DNA testing for my parents, my dad's side in particular. And my ancestry, at the end of the Ice Age, we were in the Ukraine, what's now the Ukraine. And at the time, they were building mammoth bone houses.
Wow. Yeah, you have
So
a
my
special
ancestors,
link
yeah,
with
they
mammoths.
might have been living in them.
And of course you
houses.
discover a mammoth.
Of course.
So one of the I've been trying to think of how to phrase the question, but for somebody who, I mean, obviously we know why it's important to, learn these things about creatures that walked the earth tens of thousands of years ago. But I guess just, I don't know, I'm compelled to just be like, for the average person, you know, how would you impart that learning about these things is important? Why is digging up a mammoth and trying to figure out everything that led to its,
Demise.
deposition there?
Right.
Why is that important to us, or why, what else can it tell us beyond just, oh, a mammoth died here and somebody may have taken shelter in it?
Yeah.
Like, what is the larger understanding that can be gleaned from that?
Well, when you're talking about the end of the Ice Age, obviously you're talking about climate change. And that's a natural climate change, which happens occasionally. And anything we can learn about climate change is obviously something important today. We are in what's called an interglacial right now, which is a warming period between the glaciations. Someday the glacials will be back, maybe another 10,000 years or more, but they'll be back again, and they'll be probably covering the area where we're sitting.
Yeah.
But anything we can glean about how people interacted, how they affected climate change, or if they affected climate change at that point. Going back this far, people probably didn't affect it at all. We don't have a real good evidence for that. But anything we can learn about climate change, period, natural or unnatural, is important. A lot of people look at Native American cultures as being very environmentally friendly, and they certainly are compared to us by miles and miles. But they made mistakes too. They deforested areas. They caused droughts. They're humans just like us. Even though they were living much closer to nature and much more in harmony with it, there were still mistakes made. And when we do archaeology, we find out about that, and that helps us inform. Well, it informs us how to deal with today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I don't want to totally take any words out of Jeannie's mouth, but that's sort of one of the main premise of her doing this podcast is to kind of find the deeper meaning in
Mm-hmm.
things, and rather than, obviously it's cool to look through a history book and go, oh, this mammoth was found and it's on display at this museum, and then you can go and check out the exhibit and little
Right.
kid can point and, oh, that looks cool, but what is it? What else is it really telling us, or what?
Yeah. Well, one thing is, if we're talking about mammoths, there's always a debate of why they're not here.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point.
Did people kill them?
We killed them.
Or of course, it's obviously, like you said, there's a thrill and we have this inherent need to want to dig through the dirt and find things. But then again, it's obviously got to go further. You're not just in it to find some bones. It's obviously to dig further, and
it's expanding knowledge of a certain type, and hopefully that knowledge is useful. But we're talking about the extinctions. By 12,000 years ago in this area, the mammoth is gone. By 10,000, the mastodon's gone. So why? That's a big question, and it's a debate that still goes on today. And there's evidence that people overhunted them. You've got elephants, basically. That's what a mammoth is. It's an elephant, just a different type. That the female doesn't become sexually mature until about 10 years old. Pregnancies are 2 years long. So they're not going to replace themselves very quickly if they have hunting stresses on them. And I find it interesting that, the two mammoths that we have been excavated here, the Schaefer Mammoth and the Schaefer Mammoth, both single males. Why would you kill a single male? Why wouldn't you go after females or babies and that's because these guys were bachelor males off by themselves, whereas you've got mom and babies
you don't want to
in a herd, and you don't want to mess with them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I would imagine just the feat of trying to hunt one, even on its own, is going to be tough. I mean, it would probably take a coordinated effort by a group of ancient humans. And
how much larger was the woolly mammoth compared to like an elephant today?
The woolly mammoth is probably equal to, ours isn't actually a woolly mammoth. It's a Columbian mammoth. Or not a Columbian, a Jeffersonian mammoth, I'm sorry. There are different species of mammoths. The woolly is the smallest. They're maybe 10 foot high at the shoulder.
Okay.
The Jeffersonian's about 12 foot high at the shoulder, and the Columbian's about 14 feet high at the shoulder. Okay. So they're big animals. Ours is about the size of the largest African elephant we know of, which is Jumbo. And again, is it just overhunting that's doing this, or is it combined with environmental change? You've got environmental stresses on these animals that are very specialized eaters. So if you've got changes in vegetation, you got diet stresses along with hunting stresses. There's usually no one answer, and that's why it's a multidisciplinary effort. You have to have the different people from the different sciences in there to do their specialty type of work. Yeah, it's very much a question, and it's very much a question that's looked at by pretty much anybody that deals with mammoths, especially mammoths. I mean, that's the ones that we know were gone when people showed up.
Well, and I can imagine like you guys are just kind of like detectives, like you're trying to solve a mystery almost.
Absolutely. We're trying to, it's cold case.
Yeah.
It's a CSI.
The coldest case.
Yeah, it is. Ice Age, and it's 14,000 some years ago.
Yeah, just thinking about it, I could start to feel maybe kind of how you feel, where it's just like, oh, I can't wait till the next clue or the next thing that can.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll get us closer to the answer. It's, when I present the exhibit at the Public Museum about the mammoths, it's a CSI. I call it, we have it on there, CSI Kenosha. It's a crime scene. There was a murder done here.
And that's, I don't come from the same field, but I have a very detective style mind. And I mean, not a whole lot about me, but I do design and own escape rooms. So,
okay. Yeah.
So,
Mr. Puzzle.
Yeah, exactly.
Really puzzle oriented. So, hearing about all this stuff, it fascinates me. And hey, maybe I can do a mammoth
escape room.
There you go. An Ice Age escape room.
Call you up and help.
See if you become extinct at the end.
Yeah, help you get designs for it. But that's a side. That's a sidetrack. But
that's funny. It's a question. Why are they not here? And then we've got them surviving on an island north of Siberia until about 4,000 years ago. But they're gene pool is isolated, so they miniaturize basically. So instead of being 12 feet tall at the shoulder, they're 6 feet tall at the shoulder. We call them dwarf mammoths.
And those were the woolly mammoths?
Yeah, those were woolies up in Siberia. And, those are existing when the pyramids are being built. And then they've done genetic studies on the bones and such, and basically the gene pool just wasn't big enough to sustain them eventually, and they're gone. And that's what's happening to cheetahs right now, actually, in the world. Their gene pool is getting smaller and smaller. There's just not that many of them around. So you don't have that variety in the gene pool to keep the species going.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that was interesting about Schaefer and Heber sites is that they predate the mammoth kill sites from out west by 1,500 years. And that was just a big explosion in the scientific thought.
Yeah, giving you more questions now than answers.
Yeah, it was. And it wasn't believed for a long time. And there's still other archaeologists out there that say, oh, no, there's nothing before the Western ones. And they've wrapped up their whole scientific life into what's called Clovis culture, which are the mammoth hunters out west. And it's not easy to change their ways. When you butt your head up against a long-established scientific paradigm, you hit a lot of obstacles, and it's taken us, like I said, 20 years of research even to get close to saying, yeah, this is all solid data. They were here. So that's what I want to know, is exactly when they came. And it seems that there are 6 sites in the whole Western Hemisphere, in the Americas, 6 archaeological sites that are all about the same date, and seem to be the earliest, and 2 of them are Schaefer and Heber. There's probably one thing, and it's not a specific site by any means, but it's probably going to Siberia and finding a mammoth that's preserved.
Yeah.
Just being there when it was found. I don't even care if I'm a part of the crew. I just want to be there.
So you were probably really excited when they found that little baby one.
Yes, actually, yeah. They've found probably about a half a dozen babies over the years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And I have a friend, a colleague who works in Michigan, who was part of that team. He's a paleontologist, and oh God, I would have loved to be there. I've seen them in exhibits. The carcasses of the baby mammoths, basically. And it's amazing. It's just amazing to see something that's, those are like 30,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a good theme to tie into this, like it, kind of amassing this knowledge and understanding is definitely you can't just be one lone wolf figuring this out. Like you said, you've worked with so many professionals, and I think it's about it's like a humanity level thing where, to understand the past, we do have to work together.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I guess that's a good transition to you as a teacher and passing on this knowledge to your class. How are you different when you teach? How do you like to teach?
I like to teach kind of in this Socratic method, a lot of questions. I ask people a lot of questions, and I want them to be engaged.
Or make them think about these things.
I think that's important. Yeah, to introduce questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Coming from more of a metaphysical area, which I'm all about, is if you ask the question, then you're more able to receive the answer. Like if you put it out there in the universe, you're just going to open up so many more doors available to you, and you'll see things differently. Yeah. You have to ask the questions.
You have to ask the questions. Yeah, and I like keeping students engaged. I don't want them, sitting there dozing off
or just memorizing
memorizing
answers to pass a test,
which doesn't work. Because what do you remember? Anything you memorized?
No. But it's you got to engage people, and to do that, you really have to get them thinking. And to get them thinking, you ask questions. Why is this happening? What do you think of that? It's important to engage the student. Otherwise, they don't learn anything.
And have you seen students of yours go on to do bigger and better things, or kind of take off in a career in the field?
Yep. Yeah, I've had several that have gone into the field. One in particular, my student, sort of, more Bob Sasso's student, which is Bob works at the University of Wisconsin Parkside as an archaeologist. He and I have been digging together for like 25 years on various things. But one of his students went on to get his PhD, and it's cool. It's great stuff.
Yeah, that has to be a rewarding part of it. That
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Anytime you can see a student going on in the field, yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah, or seeing their little light bulbs go off in class.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so cool. Good. You'd asked me about discoveries, and I think one of the things that interested me in archaeology as a little kid was the National Geographic coming in the mail and all this stuff about Egypt, and there's been amazing finds in Egypt in the last year. Just all these different tombs around the Saqqara area, and it's kind of never ending in Egypt. It's like there's stuff everywhere.
Right, yeah, stuff changes all the time. Like they're saying that even to the pharaohs, the Sphinx would have been like an ancient relic.
Yeah,
like that's how old it is.
Yeah, some say that. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah, and you have to think that obviously some of the seeds that got you passionate about this were planted at a young age. So obviously getting youth and children involved, bringing them to the museum and doing even if it's just not an in-depth, not a college level seminar, just a thing, but to get kids interested in that kind of stuff because, there's so many other distractions out there, but I think it's going to be important.
Like different, I know in the questions we talk about like them being caves. So like our classrooms are caves. So a museum, that kind of classroom, you're going there willingly and you want to learn something.
You want to learn something.
Compared to like sometimes, classrooms at school or high school and college, I don't really want to go sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's a difference there in teaching styles too.
Exactly. And the benefit of museums or even archaeology itself is that you don't need virtual reality. You have the real things right there. And I can hand you a mammoth bone and you're going, wow, that's so cool.
Yeah,
that's something that's going to stay with you.
It triggers your imagination.
Yeah, if you're a kid or if you're an adult, that's something that stays with you and influences you in so many different ways. I've had, I worked at the Public Museum for 34 and a half years, and I've been in the museum field and archaeology for, 42, 44 years, something like that. So you meet a lot of people and you talk to a lot of people during those times. And I've had people come back to me 20 years later and go, I was influenced by you and I went off to do a botany degree and I work as a botanist for the Forest Service or something like that. I'm going, wow, that's cool.
That's got to be one of the most rewarding parts. I know
it really is. It really is.
Probably one of my top 2-3 college instructors I've had was my anthropology instructor.
Ah, okay.
And so, and I was going to touch on, maybe this isn't a thing, but I feel like there's, so much out there. You think of how technology is, like you said, virtual reality, and, a lot of kids are, she even has a little one who's, it's all about entertainment and video games.
Yep.
And, I personally wonder, like, I hope archaeology isn't a thing that people lose interest in. I feel there's always going to be people interested in it, no matter what.
Too.
Yeah, I think so. And it's because you have physical objects.
Yeah.
And that connection, teaching with physical objects lasts with a person much longer than just lecturing or showing a film. Even if you see real objects in the film, it doesn't stay with you like having the real object there. So I believe a lot in object-based teaching.
Yeah, my reflection on that, just going off on my personal tangent, is the escape room element. Because we have people come in and physically handle things. It's a real world thing versus playing it as a video game or virtual reality. Right. And I think
that's so popular.
Yeah, I think that's the appeal of it. Is you can actually you're taking a key and putting it in a lock and getting your hands on stuff. So I think that's an enduring kind of facet that'll kind of immortalize the field, and just it's always gonna make it irresistible to want to, again, get your hands on physical things to learn more about the past or, even about the present too.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the fun part about working in museums is you've got all those artifacts to look at. And there's so much history in each piece.
And I love the history. Yeah. Love it. Do you have any homework for us? You can give us like a little...
Do I have any Homework.
Yeah, a little assignment that we could do or apply, or something to think about, have our brains chew on.
Yeah, I think a couple things you want to do, especially if you're local to the southeastern Wisconsin area. Go to the Kenosha Public Museum. Look at the mammoths. That's always fun because we have a standing replica. We also have original bones on exhibit. We have a butchering scene on exhibit. We have part of the excavation recreated, and it tells you all about it, and it's all CSI Kenosha. And the other thing is that a lot of the people in this area grew up around the Milwaukee Public Museum, and the Milwaukee Public Museum is internationally famous for doing dioramas, starting in about
You would like
1900
that.
on. Yeah, and they were the first to kind of do these natural environments to put their animals in, and then places like the Field Museum and the American Museum of Natural History copied. So go there because in a couple of years they're probably going to start shutting it down
In Milwaukee?
in Milwaukee and
I haven't
building a
been to
new
that one.
building.
I need to go to that one.
Yeah,
Always wanted to.
Yeah, go to the Milwaukee Public Museum because it will be very different when they open a new building in a few years. A lot of those dioramas will be gone because they can't move them. They're just made on site and built right there. So they did a study on what it would cost to move them, and it's like $1 million a piece.
Wow.
So it's too much.
Upstairs at the KPM, they have those little diorama scenes.
Yeah, they have the little miniature ones.
Yeah, the mini ones.
Yeah, but at Milwaukee Public, they have huge ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, like with elephants in them.
Wow. Oh, we got to go do that.
Yeah. So do that. Go to a museum. Support your local museum. Well, it was fun being here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are great.
Thank you for coming on and being on our first
First,
episode.
yeah, I didn't know that.
I wouldn't be surprised if we maybe once the wheels are and
Oh yeah,
and
got some good notes.
I'm sure we would, do this again too, and
Absolutely. No, I'd be
get
pleased.
even more in depth, and
Cool.
we're fine. But I mean, it makes a lot of sense that the first one is about mammoths
Yes.
and somebody who has hands-on experience with them.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we look forward to the next time.
Awesome.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Esoteric Mammoth. If you would like to learn more about our podcast, its guests, and how to get involved, please visit our Patreon, linked in the description below. We would love to hear how your homework assignments went, and if you know of any educators who would love to be on the show, please send us a message. Until next time.